to order. Ms. Jackie Ziegler, Alabama State Board of Education Member District 1, will lead our invocation. Ms. Ziegler.
Thank you. Would you please bow with me? Loving and gracious God, you are indeed the giver of all good gifts, and we thank you today for all of your blessings. For the successful outcome of our school events, for all of our staff members, both the teaching and support. We ask that you bless them abundantly, and we continue to seek your strength, guidance, courage, and strength. Be with us in our deliberations and help us be wise in our decisions as we make what is good for all in whom have placed their trust and confidence in our leadership. Please give us insight to lead with integrity, that our decisions may reflect what is right and good. Help us make decisions that are for the good of all and guard us against blind self-interest. Dear Lord, grant us the humility to always seek your will in all that we do and say. All glory be to you, our loving God, now and always through Christ and the Holy Spirit, forever and ever. Amen.
Amen. To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mrs. Bell,
Present.
Governor Ivy,
Present.
Dr. McCarty, Mr. Newman,
Present.
Dr. Reynolds,
Here.
Dr. Richardson,
Present.
Dr. Stewart,
Here.
Mrs. West,
Here.
Mrs. Ziegler.
Here.
We have a quorum, Governor.
Thank you, Ms. Thornton. A quorum is present. We'll now consider a motion to temporarily suspend certain provisions of the Alabama Administrative Code related to the requirement for the Alabama State Board of Education to vote by raised hand, the provisions related to the establishment of a quorum by physical presence and meeting by electronic means. Is there a motion to suspend the rules in this manner?
I so move.
We have a second.
Second, Yvette Richardson.
We have a second. Any discussion? Each board member will indicate his or her vote when called upon by saying yes or no. Ms. Thornton will now call the roll.
Mrs. Bell,
Yes.
Governor Ivy,
Yes.
Dr. McCarty,
Yes.
Mr. Newman,
Yes.
Dr. Reynolds,
Yes.
Dr. Richardson,
Yes.
Dr. Stewart,
Yes.
Mrs. West,
Yes.
Mrs. Ziegler.
Yes.
Unanimous vote, Governor.
Thank you, Ms. Thornton. Item E, we'll now have the approval of the revised agenda. Is there a motion to consider the revised agenda?
Move approval, Yvette Richardson.
Second, West.
We have a second, a motion and a second. Any discussion? Each board member will indicate his or her vote when called upon by saying yes or no. Ms. Thornton will now call the roll.
Mrs. Bell,
Yes.
Governor Ivy,
Yes.
Dr. McCarty,
Yes.
Mr. Newman,
Yes.
Dr. Reynolds,
Yes.
Dr. Richardson,
Yes.
Dr. Stewart, Mrs. West,
Yes.
Mrs. Ziegler.
Yes.
Unanimous vote, Governor.
Thank you, Ms. Thornton. Item F, we will now consider a motion to approve the minutes from the November 12th, 2020 meeting of the Alabama State Board of Education. Is there a motion to approve the minutes from the November 12th, 2020 meeting?
So moved.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
Any discussion? Each board member will indicate his or her vote when called upon by saying yes or no. Ms. Thornton will please call the roll.
Mrs. Bell,
Yes.
Governor Ivy,
Yes.
Dr. McCarty,
Yes.
Mr. Newman,
Yes.
Dr. Reynolds,
Yes.
Dr. Richardson,
Yes.
Dr. Stewart, Mrs. West,
Yes.
Mrs. Ziegler.
Yes.
Unanimous vote, Governor.
Thank you, Ms. Thornton. Ms. Thornton, has anyone signed up to speak today?
No, ma'am, there are no public speakers.
Okay, thank you. Item H, unfinished business. Is there any unfinished business, Ms. Thornton?
There's no unfinished business.
Okay, we'll move to item number 2, new business. We'll now consider a resolution to recognize the week of December 7th through 13th, 2020 as Computer Science Education Week in Alabama schools. Is there a motion to adopt the resolution?
So moved.
We have a
Second.
motion. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Each board member will indicate his or her vote when called upon by saying yes or no. Ms. Thornton will now call the roll.
Mrs. Bell,
Yes.
Mrs. Bell,
Yes.
Governor Ivy,
Yes.
Dr. McCarty,
Yes.
Mr. Newman,
Yes.
Dr. Reynolds,
Yes.
Dr. Richardson,
Yes.
Dr. Stewart,
Yes.
Mrs. West,
Yes.
Mrs. Ziegler.
Yes.
We have a unanimous vote, Governor.
Thank you, Ms. Thornton. We now consider a resolution to approve an alternative Class A collaborative special education educator preparation program for grades K through 6 at Sanford University. Is there a motion to adopt the resolution?
Move approval, Yvette Richardson.
Second,
Is there a
West.
second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Each board member will indicate his or her vote when called upon by saying yes or no. Ms. Thornton, please call the roll.
Mrs. Bell,
Yes.
Governor Ivy,
Yes.
Dr. McCarty,
Yes.
Mr. Newman,
Yes.
Dr. Reynolds, Dr. Reynolds,
Yes.
Dr. Richardson,
Yes.
Dr. Stewart,
Yes.
Mrs. West,
Yes.
Mrs. Ziegler.
Yes.
Unanimous vote, Governor.
Thank you. Item C, we'll now consider a resolution to approve an alternative Class A collaborative special education educator preparation program for grades K through 6 and an alternative Class A elementary education educator preparation program at Troy University. Is there a motion to adopt the resolution?
Yvette
Move
Richardson,
adoption,
move
please.
approval.
We have a
Second.
motion to adopt. Is there a second?
Second, West.
Is there any discussion? Each board member will indicate his or her vote when called upon by saying yes or no. Ms. Thornton, please call the roll.
Mrs. Bell,
Yes.
Governor Ivy,
Yes.
Dr. McCarty,
Yes.
Mr. Newman,
Yes.
Dr. Reynolds,
Yes.
Dr. Richardson,
Yes.
Dr. Stewart, Mrs. West,
Yes.
Mrs. Ziegler.
Yes.
Unanimous vote, Governor.
Thank you, Ms. Thornton. Item D, we will now consider a resolution to approve an alternative Class A choral music educator preparation program for grades P through 12 and an alternative Class A instrumental musical educator preparation program for grades P through 12 at the University of South Alabama. Is there a motion to adopt the resolution?
I so move. Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any questions? Each board member will indicate his or her vote when called upon by saying yes or no. Ms. Thornton, please call the roll.
Mrs. Bell,
Yes.
Governor Ivy,
Yes.
Dr. McCarty,
Yes.
Mr. Newman,
Yes.
Dr. Reynolds,
Yes.
Dr. Richardson,
Yes.
Dr. Stewart,
Yes.
Mrs. West,
Yes.
Mrs. Ziegler.
Yes.
Unanimous vote, Governor.
Thank you. Item E, we will now consider a resolution to announce our intent to adopt new Alabama Administrative Code Rule 290-4-3-.03 pertaining to the Alabama Core Teaching Standards. Is there a motion to adopt the resolution?
Move approval, Yvette Richardson.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there a
Second.
second? We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Each board member will indicate his or her vote when called upon by saying yes or no. Ms. Thornton, please call the roll.
Mrs. Bell,
Yes.
Governor Ivy,
Yes.
Dr. McCarty,
Yes.
Mr. Newman,
Yes.
Dr. Reynolds,
Yes.
Dr. Richardson,
Yes.
Dr. Stewart,
Yes.
Mrs. West,
Yes.
Mrs. Ziegler.
Yes.
Unanimous vote, Governor.
Thank you. Item F, we'll now consider a resolution to adopt amended Alabama Administrative Code Rule 290-2-01-.01 pertaining to the annual apportionment of foundation program funds. Is there a motion to adopt the resolution?
Move
So moved.
approval, Yvette Richardson.
Second, West.
We have a motion and a second. In discussion? Each board member will indicate his or her vote when called upon by saying yes or no. Ms. Thornton will please call the roll.
Mrs. Bell,
Yes.
Governor Ivy,
Yes.
Dr. McCarty,
Yes.
Mr. Newman,
Yes.
Dr. Reynolds,
Yes.
Dr. Richardson,
Yes.
Dr. Stewart,
Yes.
Mrs. West,
Yes.
Mrs. Ziegler.
Yes.
Unanimous vote, Governor.
Thank you. Item G, we will now consider a motion to ratify the 2020-2021 State Superintendent's Evaluation Results. Is there a motion to adopt the resolution?
Move approval, Yvette Richardson.
Is there a second?
Second, Stewart.
Any discussion? Each board member will indicate his or her vote when called upon by saying yes or no. Ms. Thornton, please call the roll.
Mrs. Bell,
Yes.
Governor Ivy,
Yes.
Dr. McCarty,
Yes.
Mr. Newman,
Yes.
Dr. Reynolds,
Yes.
Dr. Richardson,
Yes.
Dr. Stewart,
Yes.
Mrs. West,
Yes.
Mrs. Ziegler.
Yes.
Unanimous vote, Governor.
Thank you. Item H, we will now consider a resolution to approve the 2021 Alabama State Board of Education meeting and work session dates. Is there a motion to adopt the resolution?
Wayne Reynolds moves.
Motion.
Is there a second?
Second, Stewart.
Any discussion? Each board member will indicate his or her vote when called upon by saying yes or no. Ms. Thornton will call the roll.
Mrs. Bell,
Yes.
Governor Ivy,
Yes.
Dr. McCarty,
Yes.
Mr. Newman,
Yes.
Dr. Reynolds,
Yes.
Dr. Richardson,
Yes.
Dr. Stewart,
Yes.
Mrs. West,
Yes.
Mrs. Ziegler.
Yes.
Unanimous vote, Governor.
Thank you. Item I, Dr. Mackey, do you have any public or legal information to share?
Governor, I do have some. As we mentioned last month in the work session, of the hundreds, literally hundreds of school board members, local school board members around the state, we have 4 that have failed to comply this year with the School Board Governance Act, which of course is the law. There are required trainings that they must do, and I am legally responsible to report the non-compliers to the board. I think in November reported at the work session there would be 6 names. 2 of those have followed up with us and cleared their work, but we have 4. And so I have to read these out, and they will be entered into the board's minutes as non-compliers. They are Thomas Barnes of Colbert County School Board, Joe Calvin of the Tuscaloosa County School Board, Charles R. Douthit of the Homewood City School Board, and John R. Ponder of the Talladega County School Board. And it bears to note that we've had multiple correspondence these, as with others, and we started out with a list of about 20 non-compliers a couple of weeks ago, and we have whittled that down, but these 4 have been non-compliant and non-responsive to our request for compliance. So that completes my legal report, Governor.
Thank you, Dr. Mackey. Do you have a state superintendent's report?
Yes, ma'am, I do. Thank you very much for the time. I'm sorry that I'm not there with our 3 board members in person, but as with many of you, I'm having to be remote today. I think most people know, it seems to be pretty well known now, that I had to go into quarantine last week, and I'm close to the end of those days, but feeling back to 100%, so I feel very good. I have a few things I'd like to report. First of all, it's been widely reported in the media, and I've had conversation with most of our board members individually, that in the count, the official 20-day count, which we do the 20 school days after Labor Day, we have about 9,800 fewer students in 2020 than we had in 2019. And of course, the question's been, where are those students, who are those students, and what are we going to do to make sure we don't have losses in funding or instructional, or how we're going to deal with the instructional gap. So I want to report to you this morning a little bit about that. First of all, of those 9,800, 3,000, a little over 3,000, I think 3,025 of them are kindergartners. So we actually don't have records of them because they never attended school or registered for school. We just know we have 3,000 fewer kindergartners in 2020 than we had in 2019. Our local schools are reaching out in the community to pre-K programs and trying to identify who those students are. Our biggest concern with them is that when they come next year, and I believe that most of them will be back with us next year, they'll be 6 years old, and will they be willing to go into kindergarten, which is, kindergarten, we teach essential skills for literacy and mathematics in kindergarten, not to mention just all the kinds of things about school. So if they show up and the parents want to move them directly to first grade, that'll be an instructional issue for us in many ways, but kindergarten's not required by law, so some parents may do that. So we'll continue to work through the year on that. Also, as of this morning, our enrollment is actually up over 220,000 again. So we've added about 3,300 students since the last day of the count back in October. And that really is a testament to the good work of our local school system. So superintendents, principals, they've been sending out resource officers, social workers, making phone calls, and they have identified many of these students and brought them back. So our number is back up. That, of course, brings to mind the question about funding. As the governor and I have discussed, we've had many discussions with legislative leadership and with her budget folks about how we can do kind of a hold harmless for next year. And I won't go into the details of that, but I know that our board members are hearing from local superintendents about it, and just know that that is very much in the work, and everybody's been very supportive of trying to do something. And of course, the other piece is that there's an instructional crisis there. And I've said that, and I say it again today, and you'll hear me say that more, because we do have students who have simply missed a number of weeks or months of school, and it's about 1% of our student body. And that's a small number in comparison, but when you add that 1% up and you see that it's we're talking about 7,000 or 8,000 students. Certainly, it is something to be concerned about. We're very concerned about it, and we'll continue to reach out, work with our local school systems to reach out and identify those students, and then to assess them and do what we can to catch them up. And we'll talk a lot in the coming weeks about summer school next year, about before and after school tutoring and what that will look like next year, and then summer school for 2022 we're already in discussions about. Also, questions come up about so many of our schools going remote, and as of today, we have many, many more students on remote learning than we had even a couple of weeks ago. In fact, just this morning before the board meeting, I've got 5 or 6 more notices from superintendents that they're going to go ahead and go remote for the end of 2020. Some of them are delaying the start of school in 2021 already, and it is simply a matter of not being able to have enough people to keep school open in most cases. We have talked to one last week. These are just examples, but 20% of the high school students were out and 20% of the faculty out. And normally with influenza, when we reach 20% is when we say it's time to shut down and send everybody home. And so there just comes a point where you can't operate. I talked to a superintendent the day before yesterday in a very rural school in the Black Belt. They only have 32 teachers in the school, and 14 of those 32 were at home on quarantine. Now, none of them had COVID, but they were all home on quarantine. And there's just no way to run a school when 50% of your faculty are on quarantine. So we're continuing to work with the locals on that. We are very hopeful. I've been in great conversations with Dr. Scott Harris, our state health officer, and I know that they are considering the new CDC guidance. We probably will not be able to implement all the new CDC guidance because of Alabama's numbers, but hopefully some of that, and we are in hopes. And he and I talked this morning actually before the board meeting, believe that we'll be able to put some things in place even next week that'll help with that. Day before yesterday, board members got a correspondence from Dr. Langham about a graduation rate and CCR rate for the most recent finalized data, and that'd be 2019. Remember, it takes a little time, so the 2020 numbers won't come out till the spring, but they look really good. Our graduation rate's at an all-time high. Our CC rate, or college career ready rate, is at an all-time high. The gap between those two is closing. We are very proud of that report. The PARCA, as you know, does an annual report on our data, and they're working on that now. We've been in contact with them and in correspondence over the last couple of weeks, and it may come out this year before the end of 2020, and they may wait till 2021. I'm not certain about that, but in the next several weeks, you'll see an analysis from PARCA. And again, that's very good news for us, and it's really a stamp to show that the work the board's doing is working, and we want to continue down this path. Also, you'll notice on that report, a couple of you have already called me, that some of our schools have very high rates of not having CCR. So they're very low rates of college and career readiness. And those that have the bottom 25%, our OSI team, headed by Melissa Shields, they're already working on contacting all of those schools for strategies about how to get their CCR rates up and how to close the gap between graduation rate and CCR. So Dr. Boyd's working on that, and Melissa Shields works with our school improvement team, is working directly with those schools. And then just a couple of other things. I'll be briefer on these. The status of implementation of the Alabama Literacy Act has been a question recently. We continue to push forward with implementation. Many of you may know or may have seen that the Speaker of the House sent a letter to his members this week asking them to support us in continuing to move forward with full implementation, and we are doing that. But it is a struggle right now, and everything about school is a struggle this year. But we continue to support them, and had a call just earlier this week with our state reading coaches from across the state, giving them strategies for how they can then do the best they can to support our local schools. You know, some days they show up expecting to coach reading, and they end up themselves having to teach a class because we've got principals driving buses and all kinds of things going on. But we continue to move that work forward. and we'll have more details in the weeks to come. Our computer science, you passed a resolution this morning recognizing this very week as Computer Science Education Week, and you got a report from Don Morrison a couple of weeks ago that shows really exemplary data for how we're expanding computer science across the state. I want to recognize Dr. Jane Meyer, who works in our department, who was noted by the State Personnel Office as an honorable mention in Employees of the Year for the state of Alabama, not just our department, but for the state of Alabama. And Dr. Meyer does a superb job, as you all know, and we're very proud of her. And then I close my report, Governor, actually on a little bit of a sad note. Of course, we're all dealing with COVID now. We actually have lost 2 teachers this week, have lost their lives after dealing with being in the hospital for quite some time with COVID. And certainly just want to continue to remember those families of those that are struggling and those that have lost loved ones. We are not, without being cognizant of the fact that it's hit some families really, really hard. And I thank you for the time, and that concludes my report, Governor.
Thank you, Dr. Mackey. The next elementary and secondary education meeting of the Alabama State Board of Education will be held on Thursday, January 14, 2021, at 10 a.m. in the Gordon Persons Building Auditorium, and the work session will immediately follow in Room Plaza 103 in the Gordon Persons Building. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved, Wayne Reynolds.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Each board member will indicate his or her vote when called upon by saying yes or no. Ms. Starkey will now call the roll.
Mrs. Bell,
Yes.
Governor Ivy,
Yes.
Dr. McCarty,
Yes.
Mr. Newman,
Yes.
Dr. Reynolds,
Yes.
Dr. Richardson,
Yes.
Dr. Stewart, Mrs. West,
Yes.
Mrs. Ziegler.
Yes.
Unanimous vote, Governor.
Thank you. So as we adjourn, let me wish everybody a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. We'll see you in the new year. We
Same
are
to you.
Merry
adjourned.
Christmas. Thank you.
Merry Christmas. Thank you.
Merry Christmas.
Thank you.
Christmas.
Thank you.
For those of you who are still on here, I know we're going to transition to the work session. I think, unless something's changed, Dr. Sibley has lined up and agreed that when they go up